Before Sonic the Hedgehog grabbed his first ring, and even before Mario and Luigi had to find the princess in another castle, there was a different iconic video game hero, Mickey Mouse. Wait, what? Hey, this is Synergy Loves Company, where we explore how Disney connects to everything so you can feel connected to Disney even when you can't be at the theme parks. I'm Eric, and today we're diving into the tangled history of video games and Disney. And actually, the two go way back, like back to the days of Pac-Man and Pong, to the first big video game boom of the early 1980s. And recently, I got my hands on this new book, Dreaming in Digital: The World of Disney Video Games. From arcade cabinets and handhelds to platformers, RPGs, and MMOs, it features 50 different milestone games from Disney's complicated history with video games. But it gets even better, because keeping me company today is the author of the book, Shaun Jex. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Well, I was really excited when I saw this book because, as I mentioned to you earlier, it kind of is what I love to do on Synergy Loves Company. I love to match up Disney with something that is, not necessarily solely Disney, something else out there in the pop culture atmosphere. And it's like this, I love it. I had to pick it up right when I saw it. So yeah, I want to get the story. I've been reading the book, but I want to get the story from the source, from you. So we got to start at the beginning. How did Disney even become involved with video games in the first place?
Yeah, so well, there's kind of a couple different answers to that. So as you mentioned, the first Disney video game was very early 80s. It was 1981. And that was for the Game & Watch system, which was a real rudimentary system. If you've seen those, it's like the LCD screen, just a couple buttons that you pushed. But Disney's relationship, and that the Game & Watch is from Nintendo. But their relationship with Nintendo actually goes way back before Nintendo was even making video games. So Nintendo started as a card company making playing cards. And in, I think it was 1959, they worked out a deal licensing with Disney to start having Disney characters on their playing cards, which led to a huge increase in sales for them. And then that kind of paved the way for that relationship later when they started working on the Game & Watch system, which originally was just created. If you are familiar with the story, the creator was on the train one day watching commuters play with their calculators to entertain themselves, to and from work. And he was like, well, we've got to be able to do something better than that. And so decided to pitch this idea to Nintendo for the Game & Watch system that used the same sort of LCD technology as these calculators, and would be a small handheld that they could take with them. And the first one of those for the Game & Watch system came out in 1980. And then within a year, they were introducing more titles on basically their second generation program. And Mickey Mouse was the first one of the Disney games that they created for that. It was just a very simple game featuring Mickey.
That was that's like the beginning in your book. You kind of get into that, and that was like shocking to me because I never I heard of the Game & Watch, but I would have never kind of associated it with Disney and Mickey, and it's those Disney characters are like, they're like gold, right? Because like they're so recognizable, Mickey especially. And so you got 50 video games in your book, and I was wondering, what were some of the ones that like best utilized the Disney characters? Like that Game & Watch with Mickey, like was it just kind of Mickey on a game, or was it really quintessentially Mickey?
Well, so like the Game & Watch wasn't really, especially the first one, because it was just Mickey on a farm catching eggs as they rolled down a thing and trying to keep them from hitting the ground. So like if you ever played any of the old like Tiger Electronics games, that the little handhelds like that, and there's like one or two controls and not much going on with it at all. That's really all the Game & Watch was. In terms of games that really brilliantly captured the characters, I think if we're going with a couple titles, I've got to put DuckTales. It came out in '89 from Capcom. I think it's one of the best Disney games that was ever created in terms of the graphics, the soundtrack. It so perfectly captures, like, if you've played the game, it's a platforming game, and you go to different locations around the world and even to the moon. That really made it feel like you were kind of getting into an Uncle Scrooge adventure, much like the cartoons with DuckTales, or even really like the old Carl Barks comics, where Uncle Scrooge is, traveling around the world and going on these exotic adventures, almost like an Indiana Jones type character. And that the video game really had that sort of feel. And I think it's cool, especially if you were a fan, because you had classic villains from DuckTales like Magica De Spell and the Beagle Boys and Flintheart Glomgold all in the game as well. So it's one of those games that really let you dive into the universe if you were a fan and be part of it.
That one is one of my favorites of all time. I'm not going to lie. And I know they did like the kind of remaster of it for the phones, and I still have it on my phone. I don't think it works so well. I keep on loading it on there when I've gotten new phones because I don't think they've done any updates or anything. But I just that was one of those games from my childhood too. So like that one, I totally know exactly what you're talking about. It was the DuckTales game.
Yeah, it's just so good. Everything about it. The graphics, like, I know on the remaster they kind of updated the graphics, but I love those originals as well. And the soundtrack, especially like the moon theme, I think is the one that stuck with everyone. They even ended up working that into like later lore when they remade the DuckTales cartoon. They turned it into a lullaby in the show, so it really just had a lot of lasting power. I think another one that I'd put in there, and I think I was actually really kind of inspired, was what they did with Kingdom Hearts. Is another favorite. The ability to take all of these classic Disney characters and then the Square Enix like Final Fantasy characters, you wouldn't ever really think of them merging under any circumstances, and they pulled it off so beautifully. And again, it gave you this really cool experience to actually go into these characters' worlds. I love the fact that rather than taking all the characters and kind of lumping them all into one world where you work through the different bosses, you actually had to travel to the different planets where the characters were. And so it gave you the chance to go into Halloween Town from The Nightmare Before Christmas, or, you actually jumped into a book and went to the 100-Acre Wood and went to Wonderland. They combined in really surprising ways and exciting ways that let you experience those worlds in completely different than you ever would have expected to.
No, and so Kingdom Hearts is one that like I've only ever really kind of watched from afar. I haven't really gotten a chance to play those games. And I think it has to do mostly with the consoles that I actually owned, and the availability, and as far as like that kind of stuff. But no, like I've always been so like intrigued by it, which that's everyone who I know has played it or gotten into it says that it is like the greatest as far as some the gaming goes, and just like those worlds. And it's like, I know we've seen those like walk around characters of like the Mickey and Goofy from like Kingdom Hearts that popped up in like Disneyland at one point, and it's like, we need to do more of that. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I would love to see more from that. They're really great games. The plot can get extremely complicated, so if you're getting into them, be prepared for that. You might need a spreadsheet to keep track of all the different plot lines, but it is great.
And that I think is the thing that has kept me away. And like as I was reading into it, it was like there is a lot here.
Yeah, there is a lot going on, and enough that they've now spun it out into manga and light novels, and there was even for a while talk of an animated series, although unfortunately that never ended up happening. And I think if I was going to throw another one on there for games that I think really captured the characters, I'd go more modern, and I think Dreamlight Valley has really done an amazing job creating a new experience for gamers. So like a lot of people will describe it as, well, it's It's Animal Crossing, but set in Disney, which is kind of true in that it's a cozy game. It's really more focused on vibes than it is on plot, although there is more story than there is to a game like Animal Crossing. Another thing that it kind of just fulfills dreams, I think, for a lot of Disney fans, just to be in what almost seems like a casual real world experience with these characters. You get to go in, you get to build your environment, and then invite them into it, sort of. But everyone that comes in adds their own sort of twist to the area that you're creating. And I think that sort of cozy familial thing is what a lot of people love about Disney. And so getting the chance to do that in a really low stakes sort of environment, I think is a lot of fun.
A lot less involved than a Kingdom Hearts situation.
Yeah, for sure.
More casual. But that gives us the kind of, in a way, it kind of, those games that you gave us also kind of give us the, like the breadth of Disney video games, and how there are so many different, styles and types and ways to kind of get into it. So we talked about some of the ones that use the characters really well, and those ones are like really famous ones that I've heard of. If I haven't played them, I've heard of them and dabbled in some. But I want to know. So you did a bunch of research, and I know, like in the introduction, you say that you picked these 50, but you had tons to choose from as far as the history of Disney gaming. What were some of the strangest or most surprising kind of games that popped up in that, like, this is a Disney video game situation?
So one of the ones that made it into the book, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you'd call it one of the strangest. It had such a convoluted story behind it, it was just called Donald Duck when it was released on the Famicom system. You never got it on the NES, or rather you did in the US, but it was called Snoopy's Silly Sports Spectacular. The way it worked is there was, back in the 80s, if you might remember these games, there was a series of games that were called like Summer Games, and it was you played the Olympics, and there was a Winter Games and Winter Games 2. And it became a pretty big craze creating these games that gave you Olympic decathlon type events, which then inspired a parody called Alternative World Games, where it was very silly versions of Olympic type sports. Donald Duck was basically a Disneyfied version of Alternative World Games. It took those games and just kind of plopped Donald Duck in it and changed them a little bit. So it already had kind of a weird origin story. It's not really a real likely pairing. But then because of licensing, once it came to the United States, they didn't have the licensing to use the Donald Duck character here, so it had to get switched over to Snoopy. And so I think that's one of those really weird. When I looked through it, there were a bunch of games that would be released like that, where they had Disney licensing rights in one country but not in another. So you might find it under one title that had a Disney-related name in Japan, but not in the US. Some of the other ones, I think just in general, and I've talked to people who really loved it, but it was conceptually so strange, was I think it's Goofy's Extreme Skate Adventure. It's not in the book, but it was just sort of, it's still so conceptually funny to me, that it kind of came on the tail of video games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which, were huge smash hits. And they wanted to kind of capture that energy. And so they took Disney characters and put them on skateboards. And then they wanted to kind of have the feel of the soundtrack. And, Tony Hawk Pro Skater's generally considered to have one of the best video game soundtracks ever, with lots of punk. There's metal and stuff like that on it. And that's not going to overly translate well to a Disney game. So they used like a little bit of pop punk and a little bit of like radio Disney hits. And then it's such an odd sort of combination. I know what they were doing in the market that they wanted to capitalize on, but it's just sort of funny conceptually, because they're both great, but the worlds of Tony Hawk and the worlds of Disney couldn't be more different. So attempting to try to marry them into one was an odd choice.
Yeah, that one is, it's kind of one, I feel like Disney gets into that sometimes, where they like try to replicate something, but within the Disney parameters, and it doesn't quite hit the same. Thinking this kind of skinned Snoopy Donald Duck thing, um it's kind of a wild idea to me too, because it's kind of like, we couldn't get Donald Duck, so we'll just put Snoopy on it. Is kind of like, you know what I mean? Like that idea of, we just need a recognizable name
Yeah.
to put on it.
Disney, well, the precursor to Disney Interactive, where it was Disney's own video game studio, didn't really even get started until like 1989. And then even when they got started in that, they were just working with third-party creators that would make the game and then give it to them, and they would slap the Disney name on it. And so the quality, because Disney wasn't really involved in designing video games at the time, the quality can be real uneven in some of those games. So you do have some really great stuff, but then you have some stuff that was like, oh, this was just, the Disney name slapped on it. And Disney apparently even later said some of the failure of that was because of those quality issues, and because they were really more familiar with making movies than they were creating video games. And so they were kind of out of their depth in some of those areas. So it can be a little hit and miss. I think you do have some that aren't as great, but then you have like everything that they created with Capcom in those early days was incredible, because you had DuckTales and the Rescue Rangers game and Darkwing Duck, and you had just an unbelievable amount of talent working on them as well. So I think it's like anything. There's good out there, but you have to kind of wade through some of the nonsense too sometimes.
Yeah. No, and speaking of the good and the nonsense, because with so many Disney video games, I do have to ask the question: how many of these were you able to get your hands on and play before putting them into the book? Because even I think you even say like one of the best parts of doing the research is playing the games. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I joked, well, because the first book that I wrote was about animated characters. And so I joked that really it just gave me an excuse to sit around and watch cartoons and old animated movies and then tell everyone it was for research. And so with this book, it was, oh, what else would be good? Well, I'd love to sit around and play video games some more. So I'll write a book about video games, and I can call that research when I sit around and play them. I've played of the 50, I think I've played 30 or 31. So a pretty good chunk.
Oh yeah.
Some of the ones like you can still get your hands on the Game and Watch, but it's usually like a special order through eBay or something like that, and the price gets up there pretty good. And getting your hands on some of the like Tiger Electronics things, like one of the games that's in the book is, and I probably won't even pronounce this right, but Onk Pixu, which is a French name, I believe, for Uncle Scrooge. And I wouldn't even know where to begin trying to get my hands on that. So those ones were a little harder to get my hands on. Some of the games I just had to do with systems that I have. Like I've Fantasia Music Evolved, which was on like the Xbox with the Kinect, was not something I really had access to. I could probably still play that at some point, but it was hit and miss on some of those.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I mean, it does kind of it does kind of matter what you have to play them on, or what you've had in the past to play the games on, because as I go through like the history of these games, it's like there was no there'd be a span of time where it was like they were working with maybe one specific console, but it really isn't. They jump around to who they're working with. You mentioned like the Xbox. There was a lot that they did with Xbox for a while, which it's like they get a contract going and they rock and roll with it. And then it's like when they were doing that Xbox 360 stuff, there might have been less than happening on like PlayStation and Nintendo's side. But it's like it really depends on those systems that you have. Of course, too, I know you're not gonna like go buy an arcade cabinet for some of those that were only arcade. So like, yeah, some of them are just inaccessible these days. I also don't know if you need to like get your hands on a Game and Watch to kind of understand the concept of gameplay, right?
So
It's kind
I
of
would actually,
self-explanatory. What's it? Yeah.
I would actually love to get my hands on that. Now, I will say, while I haven't played uh, the Mickey Mouse on the Game and Watch, there was a different version of it later that didn't have Mickey Mouse as the character. It's the exact same game, but because of licensing things, they just released it with a different character, where you're still catching the eggs and all of that. And I think it's just called Egg instead of Mickey Mouse. And that you don't need a Game and Watch on the Nintendo Switch. They've got their they've got the NES online collection and the Game Boy online collection and things like that. And one of them has a handful of Game and Watch games on it. So I have played it, just not the Mickey Mouse version. So that's kind of fun. The fact that you can still kind of get the experience for what was the exact same game, just with the one little character switched out.
That's pretty awesome. I did write that down because I do have a Switch and we do have access to the those older game, like the kind of arcade, the NES and all that kind of stuff.
And
Um,
some of the ones, so like if you go to any kind of retro arcade, a lot of them have like that Tron cabinet in them, so you still can play that. So that's pretty cool because that is a fun game to play and to get your hands on.
yes.
It's a little harder on some of the I've played them, but some of the games like Tron Deadly Discs that were on the Intellivision, it's not real easy to get your hands on Intellivision now. So
Not,
uh,
I wouldn't think so.
and on some of those, you can find emulators and stuff for them online, but the emulators aren't always great.
No, I am impressed by your having played 30, 30 some of them, because that's a good amount. I don't think as I went through this game, I was like, I maybe had, I could get like 10. I was like, I for sure have 10 of these solid that I've played like longer than just like a looking at it here at someone's house or something. But no, that's let's get into talking about like our your video game history. So like, were you the kid who had all the consoles? What were those games that you grew up on? Those, like, the video game consoles and actual games that were your go-tos.
So my first gaming system was a Commodore 64, so that's going way back.
Oh yeah.
I still love the Commodore 64, but I didn't have any of these games for them. But I did have I had an NES. I had an NES, and then later a Sega Genesis. And so some of those, like those Capcom games that I talked about, those were ones that were definitely on the list of things that I played. And boy, I'd love to say that I was great at them, but I was not, and I'm still not overly like I've beat DuckTales and some of those, but I am terrible at the Darkwing Duck game. And then it's funny because I didn't actually have an SNES in some of those, so I did not get on the first time around some of the games like The Lion King or Aladdin. I've played them since, and they are as hard as everyone says, at least in my experience. And then I kind of came back around to it with the PlayStation. So the first PlayStation going forward, the Wii. So I played Epic Mickey when it first came out, which I loved. But I've had a lot of different systems. There's just a little gap there in like the SNES and that time period where I didn't.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, when you were starting out, I was like, your like 80s to 90s journey is very similar to mine. We had the NES, and we opted for the Genesis instead of the SNES when that came out. So I had those two growing up. But I will say, talking about like video game skill, I was the quintessential younger brother player too growing up. So like, we'd play Mario, my brother would go like, 5 levels before he died, and then I would be Luigi and immediately fall in the pit, and it would be his turn again. So I don't have the video game skills very much, just because I didn't get that much time on the game. But no, it's it's kind of interesting how those consoles do shape the games that you love, because like DuckTales, like we were talking about before, like that was an NES game, and it was like the Disney game. As far as Disney games, did you have like a favorite Disney game growing up? Or
Oh, geez. Well, I hate to sound redundant, but I'd probably stick with DuckTales if we're going well back. I just think it was of all of those games that I've played from that era, that one I think is the perfect one.
is that's the next question. Is DuckTales the perfect game? That's and the answer is yes, of
Yes,
course, but
yeah, it absolutely is.
that's just definitive. I that you've heard it here. DuckTales is the perfect game. But no, so that kind of gets, I want to talk about kind of a big question here is like, does Disney itself, you talked about Disney Interactive when they started kind of taking control over the games that they were making, not just like licensing off their characters to a Nintendo Game and Watch or something like that. But like actually this is we're making the games. Um, does Disney do games well?
I think Disney can do games really well. Now, of course, they don't. They shut down their video game production now, so it's not even something they're doing anymore. But I can think of some of that era. Like I actually really enjoyed Disney Infinity, which was a Disney game, but that Toys to Life thing that happened back in the Skylanders craze and all of that.
Yes.
And I thought that was a cool game that Disney did that lets you again take control of the characters in kind of new, interesting ways. It's really hard to tell because so much of what they've done has been through other outside companies, and that's back to what they're doing today. So that there are still Disney games coming out, but they're working with other developers for the creation of them, which I kind of like actually, because you've seen some things like more recently, like Tron Identity and Disney Illusion Island, were both done by indie developers. And so I love that is giving the smaller game studios a chance to work with such established franchises. And I think you get that it's resulting, and I think some of like Illusion Island, Tron Identity are some of the best Disney games that I've played. And I think it's because we're kind of getting out of that bubble into that independent sphere where you have people who are willing to take risks and do more interesting things with the IP.
Yeah, Illusion Island. I played that one. Like I said, we have the Switch now, and I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, no, it's so fun. It's got that old platforming style, kind of like that I grew up with, and I feel like that's another one where they just pulled it off completely. Like the animations are great, the soundtrack is great. Mickey seems to only show up every so often in the, like, he goes through phases of when he shows up in video games and then kind of goes away for a while. So it's cool to get one that is all the classic characters again, like Mickey, Donald, Goofy, where they're really integral to what's going on. You do have some where it's just like Mickey, Donald, Goofy kind of slapped on something like that sports game. This is a little bit different. The Disney Illusion Island is almost like watching a Mickey short that you get to be part of.
And you mentioned Tron, which I want to bring up because so Disney maybe doesn't grab the reins when it comes to video games. It's something that they let people kind of they entrust their characters to
Right.
companies to do something great with, and sometimes it works out really well. But as you said, one of their excuses was probably that, we don't do the video games as well as we do the movies. We're focused on the movies. And over the years, Disney has made some video game movies. So I want to ask that what your opinion of the Disney video game movies are. Like, do they represent video games well?
I actually think that they do. I love both the Tron films that have come out. And I especially love, obviously, the original. And I think that feeling, as someone who grew up going to arcades and things like that, I love, everything with Flynn and the arcades and the ability to go into, I just love the whole Tron universe and actually jumping into the game and the grid and all of that. But I think that is, Tron might be the definitive video game movie. Like, there are a lot of video game movies that are made, and I might put that one as the video game movie. And I think Wreck-It Ralph does in its own way too. Obviously, the first one was more of a celebration of those old school arcade games, like the racing games, and Wreck-It Ralph itself was very reminiscent of like the Rampage arcade game, and I thought that was a lot of fun to go back and celebrate those. The scene in Wreck-It Ralph where they are in like the villain support group, watching that is one of my favorites, because you can go through each of the characters and be like, oh, I played that game, and there's Zangief from Street Fighter, and I know him. And so I feel like they captured a lot of little details in that you didn't have to be a hardcore gamer to enjoy, but if you were, you enjoyed it on a different level as well. There were little inside jokes that you got. And I think they did it with Ralph Breaks the Internet too, jumping more into the app games and the massive multiplayer online games that they sort of allude to in that. So I think, even though they usually entrust the game making to other people in terms of capturing the spirits of gaming, they've done it really well in their films.
Oh, for sure. I love it too. Like you talked about, like the villain support group kind of in Wreck-It Ralph. Like that made me think of, they do a really good job of blending like real video games that exist in our world with these like fictitious video games that feel like they existed in our world, even though they didn't. Like Fix-It Felix is, you know what I mean? It's like, or like that whole Wreck-It Ralph Fix-It Felix feels like a retro video game.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that when you're watching it, you could almost have that sort of Mandela effect of being like, no, I swear I remember seeing this and playing this, because they did a good enough job creating it that you could almost convince yourself that, yeah, I played that game. I know that. I know what they're talking about. I would actually love to play a cabinet of Fix-It Felix. I think that would be incredible.
Yes. No, and that's we're on the same page. I agree. I think they do. I do love Tron too. And you said it, it kind of set the bar for video game movies, right? Like that was the one that really did it in a big way. I'm excited for Tron Ares. I know some people don't like what's it, Jared Leto, but no, I'm all for it.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. And I think the funny thing with those movies is that they tend to be like, Tron didn't do well on its release, and then decades later everyone talks about it as a classic. And Tron Legacy really kind of flopped on its release too, and now you'll actually see a lot of online discourse of people who love Tron Legacy and are very vocal about it. So it seems like the public sentiment on that always tends to be like a decade or two behind when the movie comes. They end up loving it, but it takes a little while for people to get to saying how amazing it is. But and luckily with Tron, they've kind of filled that in with, we've had games in between the movies, first for the Intellivision and then later like Tron 2.0, and there was an animated series. But yeah, it'd be nice if we didn't have to go 20 years every time before the next movie came out.
For sure. Speaking of 20 years in the future, let's talk a little bit about the future of Disney gaming. So you kind of give us a good, well-rounded history, but I want to kind of get into your thoughts on where you'd like to see gaming go for the future of Disney. So I got some like events that I'll throw out there, or kind of milestones that are happening now or have happened. But just before we even get there, where would you like to see video games go for Disney?
I kind of alluded to it earlier. I love that right now they've started, rather than just working with, say, like the big AAA studios, that they've started putting it out there that they're more than happy to work with and push indie devs too. If they've got a good idea, if they can execute well, that they'll work with an indie developer, a smaller studio. And I'd love to see more of that, because I think that some of the most interesting stuff happening in gaming right now is happening at those smaller studios, sometimes where it's just like one or two people working on a game out of their home. They're, I think, doing some of the most outside of the box innovative thinking for games and coming up with things that are, there can be, I think, sometimes a tendency to get focused so much on the wow of the technology and what they can pull off that sometimes that can be sacrifice experience and the fact that video games are supposed to be fun as well as visually stunning. And I think that the independent developers are really doing a good job of capturing that. So I would love to see Disney keep pursuing those relationships, and letting them take a crack at what they can do with the characters and introduce some kind of exciting things that way.
Yeah, I mean, that if we get more like Illusion Island, I'm all for that for sure. Like we said about that game being great. But some other gaming things have been happening with Disney, and I want to get your opinion on where you think they might end up, or how you feel they're working with them right now. I'm gonna kind of switch my order that I have them down here, and the first one I want to talk about is like the gamified park experiences, like Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run.
I think Smuggler's Run is incredible, and I do love that, and the way that they've sort of turned it into, well, it is gamified. You kind of get a score, and how they react to you is based on your performance, and I think that's a lot of fun. I think that they tried it on a grander scale with the hotel, and I think that the hotel could have been a great idea. I just think that the price point made it too difficult for the general public to go and experience it, because I love the concept behind it, where the entire thing is an interactive. It's very similar to live action role playing, really like a live action role playing game, and I think that's great. I think if they had been able to pull that off at a more achievable price point, it would have been an experience that I think would have blown a lot of people away, because my understanding, I didn't get to do it, but the people who did do it seemed to love it. It just wasn't sustainable at the price point. So taking that sort of gamification out into the everyday experiences, I think is really cool. I like the idea of, when we talk about the parks, I think what's cool about it is it's easy when you go to a theme park or a movie or something like that to be a very passive observer of the entertainment. So like, you sit on the attraction and you watch the way you're supposed to be entertained. I think it changes it when you are an active participant in the adventure. So in its own way, I think that's one of the reasons that I really loved like Tom Sawyer Island. You went to Tom Sawyer Island and you weren't just, sitting there being entertained. You were doing the exploring and discovering things, and you played a key role in it. And so I think that gamification makes it almost more relational when you're in the parks, so that you actually play a key role in the story. And I think you take something different away from that as a fan than you do when you're just like sitting and watching something happening in front of you.
That's a good point. The even something as like low tech as Tom Sawyer Island, right? Like, we've got Smuggler's Run and we've got Tom Sawyer Island, but they both give you that immersive experience.
They did it really. I loved, and sadly some of these are going away, but like the Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, I thought was a great experience that took a little bit of that video game like play, where you had the cards and you interacted with things and chose the different cards to engage in the battles, and yet let you explore the parks and see areas that you normally wouldn't see. To go unlock things, you'd have to go see, look through different store windows and go to little nooks and crannies that you normally never would have bothered with. But Disney Imagineering is so great about packing everything with details that you really realized what you were missing by just walking straight by those. It forced you to interact with it on a deeper level. And so I think when they did that, or like the Pirates League adventures over in Epcot, it's had a variety of forms. I think it was like a Kim Possible game at first, and then DuckTales and Phineas and Ferb. I love that. I love that interactive element. So I'm all for if they want to keep doing that and expanding that. I would love it.
Dare I ask, if you were to armchair Imagineer a game like that, what would you put on it?
I don't know. I love, like I said, I love the ones that they've done. And I think you've got a little bit of stuff like that now in there. If you have like the Play Disney app, I know there are things that you can do over in like Galaxy's Edge and things like that where you can interact with things. So if I were going to, just because of me, I think coming up with some sort of interactive over in Disneyland, if you go to Disneyland and come up with some sort of interactive game in Mickey's Toontown, I think that that would be amazing. So I think it's a perfect, they've got so much open park space there. I think it would be a perfect place for it as well.
Oh, that would be a great setting.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That was some good gamified parks that we got into there. I love it. But I'm going to kind of veer us off the parks for a little bit, and I want to ask about Disney, what you feel about and kind of what you think the future might be for Disney's investment in Epic Games and Fortnite. What do you feel about that relationship, and do you think there's something there for the future?
I mean, I don't have any problem with that relationship. I think it's an interesting merging of the two worlds. I'll be curious to see what happens. I think right now or very recently they were doing a crossover event like with Star Wars and bringing in a ton of Star Wars characters. And I think, and if they did do this, I think it's brilliant. I think they may have even included Darth Jar Jar as like one of the characters that you could use. So look, like Epic Games, Fortnite, that's not going to be for everybody. I know there were some people during like the D23 that they saw it and they were like, what the heck is this? Why is this here? But not every form of entertainment, not every franchise is for everybody, and that's okay. And there are a lot of people who love Fortnite and a lot of people who love Disney. And I think if you can bring those two together in an interesting way, then I think it's great. I think if they can create something new and fun out of it, I think it's cool. So, I may not really play it now. I have kids who love Fortnite, so I don't have any problem with it at all. I think it opens up interesting new relationships, and I'd love to see what they end up coming up with out of it.
That's where I'm at with it too. I have my son is way into Fortnite and getting skins and all sorts of whatever things you can do in the game. And I just wanted to watch that D23 thing. I was like, how do I do? But no, he's into it. I get the Fortnite report. So I've seen some of the Star Wars skins. So many things that they can do. It will be interesting. Do you think we'll ever see Mickey in Fortnite?
No. I'm going to say no because I don't think that Mickey would be they'd be comfortable with Mickey shooting people. So I think that, like Marvel characters, Star Wars characters like that, I think they would be okay with. I'm just thinking like when they made Kingdom Hearts, Disney was very picky about the sorts of weapons. That's how we ended up with the Keyblade, is more extreme weapons were proposed at first and Disney said no. So I don't think you would see any of the Sensational Six in Fortnite. Now they, leadership changes. Sometimes those things change. So I guess you never say never, but off the top of my head, I wouldn't expect to see him in there.
That's probably, I think I believe you on that one. I feel like that is probably, and there's no way around that in Fortnite. So yeah, Mickey's probably not going to make it.
I wouldn't expect it. Now, like I said, you can't ever rule anything out and things change. But for the time being, I think that would be kind of a line that they're not quite willing to cross yet. If you want that, there are other avenues for it, as now, like the movies and stuff with Steamboat Willie that they're doing with those changes. So if you need a violent Mickey, they're outside of Disney sources for it.
It's happening. It's happening all around. There's a lot to see, and I'm kind of excited to see where the future of Disney and games go. I don't like to talk about what Walt would have done, because of course we never know what Walt Disney would have done. But he was always very interested in technology. And at the very least, I think the idea of video games probably would have intrigued him in some way.
It's definitely hard to tell. And I know people like to throw around a lot. Walt would feel this and this about this. And I don't want to do that because I have no idea. But I will say that in everything I've read, he adored storytelling and the possibilities of storytelling. So I do think he at least would have been intrigued by the form as a new way to tell stories, and would have been interested in seeing how they could expand that and bring stories to people in a new and meaningful way, because video games, have the capability of doing that when they're done right.
So, Shaun, thank you so much for joining me on Synergy Loves Company today. I had a lot of fun reading your book and then getting to talk about video games and Disney with you. So how can other people get connected to you? Where can they find you and your writing and all that kind of stuff online?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. So if you want to find me, I'm on social media like Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads at Make Mine Music, and you can actually find I have a weekly blog that I write about Disney and the world of Disney music it's at makeminemusic.com. So you can kind of keep up with what I'm doing there, and there's information on my various writing projects.
Go check out the book. Go check out Make Mine Music. And once again, I'd like to thank Shaun for keeping me company today, and thank you for joining us for our conversation. Definitely go check out Dreaming in Digital, the world of Disney video games. There is a link below where you can find that book. Click it. You'll be able to get your own copy. And remember, sometimes the most magical Disney experiences happen outside the theme parks, like in your own home, where you can immerse yourself in a Disney video game. And until next time, keep discovering the magic in everything.